Hello and welcome to this video. And in this video, I'm going to create the PDG network for my terrain. So in previous video, we made the desert terrain and we also made a split and scattered node. Now I'm going to use this in a PDG system. First of all, before I start a PDG system, I'm going to double check if I actually have a project. So what is often a good idea when using PDG is to set a project. So we can set a current project or make a new project. So it's very important you can do that. So what this will do is it will automatically create a folder structure like this. And it will then automatically save data in these folders. So I set this to the hip location where I currently save my file, and it's also give this a better name, so desert project. And now let's accept. And then this is exactly then the folder structure we get. So we have a desert project and we have then all these folders created. So when I calculate PDG, they will be stored in the geometry, and every file that PDG calculates will be seen here. So it's a good idea to keep this open and to see if actually items are getting outputted. Now with that project created, we also gonna make sure we're gonna set it. So in this case, I want to set the desert project, so accept. So now we have, if we go here to set recent projects, now we have this. So that's important to create project and then set the current project. Now let's continue with the PDG network. So I'm going to create top node, so top network. And of course, we're going to double click on this. So we have our scheduler, and we want to then create an HDA processor. Place down that node. Then I'm going to fill in my terrain node. So I have that desert, desert terrain HDA, and automatically in the last step we can see then the parameters from that HDA. So we can have the size, scale, noise settings, and so on. Now, furthermore, there are some more settings. And what is important to know is that what type the HDA is. So this is a stop HDA. So if you have made an HDA on object level, you need to change this as well. We then have here the location to store and also the name of it. I'm going to change the PDG directory maybe to job. So job. So the job is basically then referencing here to my project. So I just want to be sure it's actually there. So PDG direction will probably also work, but I often just fill in job in here to be sure. Now, furthermore, for the naming, by default, it will take the name from the node. So this means getting the name from the node. And I'm going to rename the node to a good name. So I'm just going to call it desert terrain. And that should do. So let's already try out and cook the result. So we can right click. We can then cook current node or dirty and cook this node. So these are the two with the shortcuts here as well. You can remember if you use a lot of PDG. So let's cook this. And the result is ready. So we can, if we click on the item itself, it's not appearing in the viewport because we have not set it up ready. What we can do is we can right click on the item and then view current work item. So this will launch here the separate menu. And you can see it's empty, but when we focus the view, so spacebar G, we can then see our terrain here. And we can see that this is working. We have baked out that terrain that we made. Now the other thing here as well, in that folder, we now have my files. So we have the BGO files from the PDG network saved here, where I have my project set. So again, it's a good idea working with PDG to set project, because this will nicely be categorized here. So it's not randomly saved somewhere on your computer, but you know where PDG is saving files. So next up, what I want to do is then have my other HDA, so HDA processor. And this is then the split and scatter HDA. And again, same here, we have then our parameters. We have then here furthermore settings. So it's a SOP. I'm going to change this to a job directory. And the naming, of course, is important again. Split and scatter. of terrain. And one more thing here, so we can plug this in and bake this if we want to, but we only have one working item. But I want to generate, for example, if I want a 4x4 terrain, I want to generate 16 work items, but I only have one here. So there are multiple ways of doing this, and the way I like to do this is by using the wedge node. So place down the wedge node, so in between here, and this is generating the tile amounts. And in here, we can then create a attribute, so wedge attribute. And in that attribute, I'm going to call this tile number. This is just a normal float with a normal range. So when we cook this now, we will still have one item. So when I cook this, we will still have one item, and that is because here the wedge count is set to 1. So if I set this to 16 and cook this again, we now have 16 working items. So this is an easy way to add these items, and it will also export the tile number here. So each item now has a specific number. So we probably need to fill in here at the end also 16. So let me recook this. So we go from 0, and the other item is 1. Oh, we should probably go from 15, of course. So then it's 1, and 2, and so on. Now, one thing before I actually bake this result, let's also view my current result in the viewport. That will also be nicer to work with. I'm going to go back to object level. I'm going to hide my terrain. I'm going to create a file node. We're going to say view PDG. And in the file node here, so we're going to type in here, add the PDG output. And now we should be able to see that terrain now. And this gives us then a better way of working. So when I generate this now, I can then visually see it. So in this case, all the results are the same. So what is important here to enable as well is here this toggle, so create input files. And this basically is saying that we can input the geometry that we created here previously. So this HDA, it needs that desert terrain, and then it will scatter and slice it. So we're gonna say here, like, get the upstream information from the tile node here. Then furthermore, we're gonna go to HDA parameters. And in there, I actually want to now use this here, so slicing these pieces. So right now, if I would bake this node, it will always output the result of number 7. So I'm going to change this to a 4x4. So we have 16 items. So these 16 items are referencing to that. And then the number here, we can just say add that tile number I created. So I'm going to double check the naming here. So it was with a small t. So I'm just going to copy paste it just to be sure. So we're going to ask the number of what we had here. So as you can see, if I play around with the working items, you will have the number also changed. So it's important here to know that. Now we are ready, and let's do a first cook. So right click and then cook node. So this might take a moment. So it's done cooking now, and let's check the item. So I can click on it. I have that tile, and when I continue, that all seems actually correct. So that looks pretty good. So we have the exact result that I wanted to have. Also be good to do here in the scheduler, set our working directory to the job. So this refers again back to that project we set. So we save out files there specifically. So overall, this is the PDG setup that I'm going to use. And what I want to mention here, that this is quite simple. We only use 3 nodes here in PDG to make this possible. Now we can do another approach on this as well. There are many ways of how we can achieve the same result here. Here is another approach you could do. So I just took some notes to visualize this. So let's say we have like more HDAs or more networks where we process data. We can, for example, have the split separated. We can generate the glyph separated, the rock separated, the foliage separated, and the portal separated. So we can have all these different tasks that I did here in one big HDA. We can separate them here as well in multiple networks. So that's up to you if you want that. So you can do it at once. You can also do it in multiple stages if you want it. So this can have the advantage that if I, for example, increase the density of my portals, I don't have to recalculate it. I don't have to recalculate the foliage, the rocks, the cliffs, the split. I don't have to recalculate that. I only have to recalculate the portal here. If in my current system, if I need to, if I increase the density of the portal, I'm just gonna recook the whole node here. Now, furthermore, let's create a HDA from this, and I'm gonna open that in Game Engine and take a look at our first PDG integration with that. So I'm gonna go here, my top network. I'm going to press Shift-C again, or click the icon. I'm gonna right-click, create digital assets, so we can create a version again. And I'm gonna PDG desert. And I can just save this default location. So now I have this big PDG node. Let's also take a quick look at the parameters. And there will be some parameters here by default. And we're just gonna select all of them. And we're gonna just say invisible. Yes, we don't need it. So we can already make the decision to add all the parameters here, like we can add the size and so on. We can add all of these parameters now. But I'm going to do the same as I did before, where I'm going to test out my tool in Unreal. And when that works, I'm going to then just keep building on top of that. I just want to make sure that everything works before I do all this work of implementing all the parameters. So here I'm in Unreal. I have a empty scene with just some lights, and I'm gonna then drag and drop my PDG asset that I just created. So let's drag and drop it in the scene. And now let's enter the asset. And normally if everything goes right, when I scroll down, I should see a PDG menu. So we have that ready to go. Now I also see something here that no visible top node has been found, so that's also important to keep in mind. So by default, the output of the PDG network will also look at nodes with the naming heout. So let's copy paste that, and here in Houdini, let's use this heout in one of my last nodes. So this is then my final output. So I'm going to save this back again. So save asset, and then here let's rebuild my asset. And normally now I should see here the top nodes, the heout, so I can see that. So every single node that has the heout and the naming will be seen here in this drop-down menu. So if you want multiple outputs or specific outputs, you can just add the heout name, and then you can have a drop-down menu and cook the specific node here. So furthermore, at the top, make sure PDG is set to ready. So if this is not here, try resetting it or refresh it. So you have to see the ready here, otherwise you're not going to have PDG support. So now is the moment to try out the current network. So I'm going to just go here, and I'm just going to select cook output. And that might take a moment, of course. So you can see it's gathering all the items, and it then will slowly cook and output it. So I will skip this part, of course. And as you can see, this is the result. So it's not quite like what I expected, but we're going to have to then tweak some of these settings, of course. So first of all, let me check actually if we are scattering all the props. So I can see I already have the bushes, so they are quite large. So I'm going to keep that in mind. So I have to reset the scale a bit and set them probably like 50% less, then I can see that I have scattered here these portals around, so that's a good thing. We can also see that bump here. So we actually deformed that terrain. Now furthermore, if I would go here to one of these parts, so I can see that my cliffs are being placed, but they are maybe smaller. So I have to also play around with the scale to see what's up there. And I will check that then later. And I can also see that I have scattered around my rocks here. So in this case, they are really small. So they also need to be bigger. So those are the main things that I scattered. So the cliffs, the rocks, some foliage like the bushes here, and some of the sci-fi portals. So they all worked, but I have to now like tweak them a bit more, get better result. Also, the material on my terrain is not showing up, so I might have to double check that as well. I also noticed that there is sometimes quite a lot of height variation here. So that might be because of the projection that I did. So I have to also double check that. So you can like see that I projected my cliffs in the terrain and it might not translate well to the other parts. So overall, we already got PDG working. So as you can see, setting up the PDG system was not that complex. We just had 3 PDG nodes, made the HDF from that, opened it here in Unreal, and we got the same result as we did in Houdini. So now it's just a bit more fine-tuning and exposing parameters. Now here I made some tweaks in my tool, and this is now the result that I get. So I have some better scattering here. I tweaked some of the scaling values. I got some better cliffs general, and you can see the whole terrain here. Now a few things that I also want to mention here with this PDG menu. So I went a bit back and forward between my Houdini asset and Unreal. And a good idea is always to dirty all the nodes here. So when you basically click this button, it will delete everything you see here in my scene that comes from my Houdini PDG tool. So I often would dirty all and then cook again, just to make sure I'm deleting what I have and I'm rebuilding that again. So now I'm going to jump into Houdini and show you what I tweaked. So I went back to my digital assets for splitting and scattering, and I made a few changes. So let me go first to my instances. So here I have my rocks. So what I did is I added some extra noise variation because I felt they could be a bit more noisy in scale, so it's not that uniform. And I also did a small wrangle here, and I say add the p-scale multiplied by value 5. That gives me a better value because the rocks in my project were pretty small, so I just say multiplied by 5 overall. Then here for the foliage, I also added the noise, but I went back to my foliage node here and I disabled the p-scale output here. So I did not like the result that I got from this node, so the p-scale result was not a big fan of it. So I just decided to make my own p-scale by this attribute noise. And also here at the bottom, I also made a clamp here, so it has to be between 1 and 3. So there are no bigger values than 3, there are no smaller values than 1. I think that was a good value for my plants. Then also here for my sci-fi portals, I basically said that p-scale will always be 1. So what happened is I scatter around these blueprints or prefabs, and in these prefabs there are already like models like a table or a chair, for example. And if the scale is, for example, 2, that means that my chair in the prefab will also be 2. So I wanted to stay consistent with my portal scaling, so I just decided to keep it 1, so the props in the prefab or blueprint are always also 1 at scale to work with. Now furthermore, I also had some issues with the cliffs, and that mainly was on my side here. I just loaded in a wrong model that was a bit bigger than what I had in Unreal, so I fixed that. Then also we had a small issue that our terrain was not properly connecting to other terrains. So what you could do is I made a small border here, and the border is then blending for my rocks here. So we have our rocks. We can also have a small transform, and I can sort of like make it more subtle if you want that. So I think 0 can work out, but you can also make it subtle if you want to. So I use then this border to blend the edges here. So you can clearly see here that we are not using that anymore. So that helped also a bit with it. But what happened here the most is also this blur. If I enable the blur here, so I made my background darker. So if I move my original terrain and my terrain with a blur, you can see that there is like a very subtle change in the height. So it's super subtle in the viewport, but in Unreal it's super noticeable because my terrain next to it is also having that little bit difference in height. So in the end you see like small gaps in the terrain. So I fixed that by just bypassing the height, as you could see. Like it's subtle, but it's definitely more noticeable when everything comes together. If you still want to do a blur, we can always go here and make a mask here. So we can make a mask by object, and we can input our cliff geometry. And then we also have a mask, and then can blur based on the mask. So in this case, I just decided to skip it because that gave me a better result. Also in the end, I placed the material node here again. That sort of helped for me. So those are the tweaks that I made. So this is then the result that I got. So we can keep building on this further. We can scatter around more props. So you now have a general idea of how to approach this, how to scatter around certain props based on certain masks and so on. You can also use certain foliage tools from Unreal. So for example, Unreal has like a foliage painting tool. You can use that to like manually add some more specific details here and there. Like it's all about bringing the two softwares together and using the strengths of each software. So Houdini is great at these procedural generations, and then we can have Unreal bringing then, for example, the brush tool, adding some more manual tweaks and so on. One more thing we can do here as well is we can open then the menu parameters, my PDG desert. And in here we can add all our parameters. So we can, for example, here use all these parameters if we want to. And a great way of doing this as well is we can go from nodes here. So we can create parameters from already existing nodes. So we don't have to drag this manually. So we can open our PDG network, our top network, and then we can select a node that I want the parameter from. So for example, let's start out with the desert terrain. Then we go here to HDA parameters, and then we have all these parameters that we originally created for that scene. So maybe I place a folder first. So this is for my terrain. And we can take everything here so we can look at that. So we have the exact same parameters, make sure everything is selected. So as you can see, now we have these parameters. So we can control them outside of the network. And we can do the same then for the scattering node. So scatter and then the parameters. So probably I'm gonna again place down a folder. So scatter, and grabbing then here the parameters. And press apply. You might also have the same situation as me where all the parameters have the name of the node. So he outsplit scatter, they all have the same naming. So the reason for that is if I go here to this gear icon and click on it, we need to disable here the prefix. So this will add that naming of the node. So I'm going to disable these two toggles here. And what I'm basically going to do is remove then all these parameters again. So you can just select them all. Just press delete. When you press apply, you will see that they are not linked anymore. Then we can do the same as we did before. We can go to from nodes, go to our network, HTA, and we can just expose the same values here. So when we drag them now, we just have the normal naming that we have here as well. So then maybe I want to have the split in here as a separated folder, so I might bring that here all the way to the top, so that's a quite important setting actually. So we can say how many tiles that I want, so maybe bring it actually here. Then important here is the tile number is set here to add tile number. So maybe I'm going to delete this setting here, so delete. And I'm going to replace this by this wedge node here. So this wedge count should be here. So I can now then replace this with tile amount. So we have then tile amount, and we also have then the count of the pieces. So we could decide to automatically calculate the value here by the tile based on the tile amount. So if you want to, for example, to have this automatically calculated, we can then grab the wedge count number here, so 16. So we can copy paste this. And what we can do is we can then replace it here. And in the front, we are going to calculate the square root. And then this will then also return the 4. So again, multiple ways of doing this. So either you can set it manually, or you can try to find a way to like get the square root, something like that. So I'm gonna just leave it at a more manual way in case you want to have like a very specific way of slicing the terrain. That's possible as well. Also, another thing to set here is now I have this wedge count, so I can copy paste this, and I can also link this here to the tile number, and I can just say -1. So this should return 15. So we have that correctly linked to each other. So it also will automatically adjust this parameter as well. Here now at my PDG node, I have then all my parameters that I wanted. So I can like play around with my terrain. I can split the terrain. I can then scatter around props and so on. So here in Real, we have our scene. We're just going to rebuild the asset. So click on rebuild. And then we scroll down, we have our PDG menu, and furthermore, we then have our parameters. So in here, we have the same parameters that we just created. So I can still here decide that, let's say I need a smaller tile count or less tiles, I can adjust that here. Or I can play around with some of the scattering seed values, like if you're not really happy with the look, we can play around with the seed value, and you should be able to get like different looks of the terrain. So with these parameters now available, we can then scale up the terrain, make bigger worlds, make whatever you want. This is a great base setup to build something for your project. And that was it for the PDG video. Next video, I want to add world composition support. And we're also then going to bake out what we see here in our scene into multiple different levels. So I hope you enjoyed this video, and thank you for watching.